Boris Yeltsin had entourage of hundreds of CIA agents who instructed him how to run Russia, claims former parliamentary speaker. This is an RT article. This is Russian state media. To be clear, this is a claim being made. There's no real evidence presented in this actual article. If we come down here, it says Yeltsin left office in 1999, but not before creating a hyper-presidential system, taking power away from a hostile parliament and removing almost all checks and balances. This move was supported by Washington, which hoped to keep the Communist Party out of power in the newly formed Russian state. And they talk about how he has a mixed legacy, with many Russians believing he was a drunkard who sold the country to Western capitalists. And of course, abroad, he's regarded as a revolutionary. I thought it was an interesting article, even though there really was no evidence presented to substantiate these claims. It's very plausible. I just finished a 3-part series on Myanmar's Aung San Suu Kyi and her foreign advisors. She literally had Australian and British citizens serving as her personal advisors on everything from reorganizing Myanmar's economy to rewriting Myanmar's constitution. She even had a UK Foreign Office employee serving as her advisor while also working for the British government, and Myanmar being a former British colony. So it's very plausible that Boris Yeltsin, this agent for change in Russia, trying to swing everything around, and just as the US and NATO have openly aspired toward have Russia subordinated to the so-called international order created and led by the US. And here in Thailand, we had this billionaire opposition leader, Thanathorn. This is Khaosod English. This is a newspaper his own family owns, and they admit Future Forward hired a lobbyist for Thanathorn's US visit. This was back in 2019, before the 2019 general elections in Thailand. He and his party lost those elections, and then he personally was leading protests out in the streets when his party was disbanded for blatant violations of Thai electoral law. And the details of this visit to the US before the general elections reveal that he was in contact with US aid in Washington, members of the US Congress, major US-based media organizations, and of course, Freedom House. These protests that Thanathorn himself was leading ultimately were being organized and supported by organizations funded by the US government through the National Endowment for Democracy. Freedom House is a subsidiary of the National Endowment for Democracy. And the only reason why people at Freedom House would want to talk with Thanathorn would be because they believed he would be interested in serving US interests if ever he got into power. And of course, the US would help him, his party, and these opposition groups take power in Thailand. That was the whole point of the protests. And that's what they did in neighboring Myanmar, and that's what they did in Russia. So no evidence that Boris Yeltsin actually had hundreds of CIA advisors, but it's very plausible that he had at least some advisors provided to him by the US who were directing everything that he was doing while he was in power. This is something the US commonly does all around the world. They claim that they're promoting democracy, but of course, foreign interference in another nation's internal political processes is interfering in democracy, not promoting it. Democracy is supposed to be a process of self-determination. So if the US is pouring money into an opposition group and giving it an advantage during elections or advising them on foreign or domestic policy, then it's not self-determination. It's being determined by Washington. So I just thought this was an interesting article to point out. This is what the Russians believed Boris Yeltsin was doing when he was in power all those years ago. We can see with our own eyes, Myanmar's Aung San Suu Kyi had foreign advisors, literally foreign citizens, helping her shape foreign and domestic policy for Myanmar. And we saw Thanathorn traveling to the US trying to get this sort of support also. And if he were in power, it would be almost certain that he would end up serving US interests in the same sort of way. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing. It's free to do and it helps the channel grow. Check the video description for all of these links that I've just went over, as well as for ways to help support my work, like by becoming a Patreon member. You can help support my work month to month. There's also ways to communicate so we can kind of build a community around this work. And as always, thank you very much for watching.